newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime and gore. Ting-a-ling-ling, city desk, full the press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press.
Welcome to the Media Project, an inside look at media coverage of current events. I am not Rex Smith. I'm Judy Patrick, former editor of the Daily Gazette, and now I'm vice president for editorial development for the New York Press Association. I'm filling in for Rex while he is away. Joining us today is investigative journalist and RPI and UAlbany professor Rosemary Armao, Barb Lombardo, former editor of the Saratogian and Adjunct Professor at UAlbany, and WAMC's own news director Ian Pickus. Thank you all for being with us.
Second bite of the apple. We got the band back together for a second week.
All right. Let's make some music.
So let's start with the trolling of a Wall Street reporter after she dared ask the Indian Prime Minister a question about human rights. Reporter Sabrina Siddiqui has come under a barrage of attacks on social media since she asked Prime Minister Narendra Modi a question about human rights during his state visit last week. The harassment has included threats, slurs, and baseless accusations that Siddiqui asked the question out of political bias. Siddiqui, by the way, is a Wall Street Journal reporter. The critics and attackers have ranged from anonymous trolls to at least one Indian government official with ties to Modi's Hindu Nationalist Party. Siddiqui was only one of two reporters who was even asked a question or even called on at this news conference with Biden, one that was shorter than most of Biden's previous news conferences with state leaders. So, first question, was it a fair question, and was the blowback fair?
Oh, it's a great question, and one that we being journalists of the world, don't frequently have a chance to ask Modi, who avoids the press. But I am not a fan of the White House press corps, have never been, but I do like the idea that when heads of state get together, they'll hold a joint conference and reporters from all sides get a chance to ask. It's frequently big news. You'll remember in Helsinki during the Trump-Putin confrontation, when a question about national security resulted in the shocking admission by Trump that he believed Putin rather than his own national security people. And then there was the famous one in Baghdad back in 2008 when George W. Bush was speaking soon after our occupation, and an Arab journalist threw a shoe, which is a big insult, threw a shoe at Bush. So I love the fact that they have to expose themselves. They would be called cowards and probably would lose the chance to speak at all with our leader if they didn't do this. And Modi saw it as an ambush, a completely legitimate question that any leader in the world should expect. He gave actually a nothing answer. Oh, democracy's in our blood, it's in our spirit. Oh yeah, we're just great. And then turned on the forces of the trolls in his own government. I applaud the Wall Street Journal for defending the reporter as well and keep on asking the hard questions.
One of the challenges of asking a hard question at that kind of news conference is just the format. You really get to ask one question, even if it's a wordy question. You're not able to provide specifics. You're not able to follow up. So it puts an issue out there, which I do applaud her for putting that issue out there. And his answer was totally expected to say, well, what do you mean? We're a democracy. When what are you talking about? And taking her down for asking a question. But in the world of journalism questions, it was an okay starter, but it really fell short of where she didn't cite reports that our own State Department has done and that other organizations have done to say specifically this had to do with discrimination and attacks against Muslims. And I think it would have been a better question if she could have thrown in some specifics into her question as opposed to what are you going to do about fairness?
Yeah, good point.
But that's a weakness with the whole system. So the fact that she even got a question in was pretty good.
There's a format to these things when there's a high-level state visit, and it is a couple of questions, and typically there are one or two that are going to be uncomfortable. It's interesting to me because we know President Biden has done fewer press conferences than most of his predecessors in the modern time, so this is a rare chance to actually get him up there, too, for a White House press conference. And, as a reporter, you're put in a tough situation there. Because the whole world, or at least those who are paying attention to these superpowers, is watching, and you only have one shot to do it, and you're trying to serve as potentially a counterbalance on a state visit that's not going to address this particular issue while the U.S. and India talk about their future together. So I have a lot of empathy for being in that situation, and then the blowback that the reporter faces. That's a tough job.
I initially thought that, reporters have to be tough. They're going to be criticized. We're making too much of this. But then I took a harder look at exactly what was happening to her, and it was personal. It was vile. It was racist. It was at a level that encouraged violence against her. It revealed personal details about her life, her family, that really was uncalled for. And as people who run news organizations, you have to worry about, we encourage our reporters, our journalists to get out there and develop a personal brand, but it comes back at them when they come under attack, and it can be very dangerous.
Can I just point out, though, that it isn't Modi who is the only offender of this. Our own Donald Trump regularly, and even recently with Caitlin Collins, called them names himself in person, much less encourage his followers to do the same, to troll them online. Journalists are much more subjected to that kind of harassment than male journalists.
Do we encourage people to develop these personal brands and get out there and let us know that they're hiking or they've got a dog, and when indeed the trolls will come at them?
I think of something that's in my colleague Sarah LeDuc's bio online, which says, a version of me is on the radio. And I think that's kind of best practice for people. And, hopefully you never find yourself in a situation like this as a local reporter, but it does happen. I mean, we've all had those creepy calls or those emails about specific details in your life when they don't like a story, somebody thinks that you've been unfair to them. I think it's a terrible side effect of our new access model that we've established on social media, where you're absolutely right, Judy. You want the clicks. You want to have the brand. You want to have people listen to what you're saying. The downside of that is that's everybody. Everybody can access you now. You should hear some of the things that happen on the WAMC listener comment line that we don't play on the radio. I mean, it gets scary sometimes.
And that's the WAMC crowd. Wow.
It's a reminder that moderation of these sites is totally necessary. That to try to run a blog, a vlog, anything, a podcast with comments that is not moderated it's just not doable. You get and this goes back to, I can remember in Cleveland at the Plain Dealer, a print newspaper in the 1980s, getting the most racist, ugly, horrifying letters when you wrote about issues of equality and justice. So it just goes with the territory. I think all of this is a reminder that there's a certain amount of courage and bravery involved in journalism. It's not just a regular office job.
Hey, let's move on to one of our favorite topics. That's cable news. We love to talk about that. And this time, the issue is, did the cable news networks drop the ball on the Russian insurrection? As the private mercenary group loyal to Yevgeny Prigozhin started to head to Moscow, and what I viewed as an astounding insurrection, news of what was happening was hard to find. This happened about midday Friday, our time, and all through the afternoon into the evening, it was nearly impossible to find out what was happening. I was only alerted by a couple of I follow Susan Glasser of The New Yorker, and she was saying, where's the news about this? The cable news was still stuck on the submersible. They were still stuck on Hunter Biden. Even Saturday morning, MSNBC was airing reruns of the Joe Scarborough morning show. So what happened? Since I didn't grow up in broadcast media, Ian, what do you think happened that they were so slow on the uptake?
I'm a little sympathetic. I think it's really hard to do breaking news well, especially when the events on the ground are so confusing and difficult to follow. And I know we bash NPR a lot on this show, but credit where credit's due. They have a reporter on the ground in Russia. They have a reporter on the ground in Ukraine, and they've been bringing them on together to talk about developments in the last few days when Prigozhin apparently cut this deal to go to Belarus. And you need people there to, one, explain, who this group is, who they're answering to, and then two, to try to figure out from a very opaque state what Putin is saying and what he means. Where is he? What are the subtext of his comments? I think that's very hard to pull off live. You're going to be behind a story like that, and we all know that cable news chat shows are much easier to make than news coverage, and that's why they do them.
I think it's really interesting to have heard the complaints, because what we normally hear on non-crisis days is why do we have to have 24/7 news? The CNN ruined everything, that before then to wait half a day, which is all it was before you begin to get comprehensive reporting of a crisis, was normal. This gave politicians a chance to say, oh gosh, what's going on? We got to figure this out. It gave news people a chance to put the experts together who could really give them information. That breather we have lost and we have missed since the start of CNN. This time, what would they have said if they had come on noon on Friday? They didn't know much noon on Saturday, which is about when I began listening to it. So I don't think it was a big loss. But you got complaints from diplomats saying, where's CNN? Gerald McFall, the former ambassador to Russia, was one of the early people on Twitter, I think, who was complaining about CNN not being there. Why did he need CNN? We do need it. We have really changed our habits. We want instantaneous, complete coverage. And the fact is, even now, days later, as we're taping this, we still don't know exactly what happened or why or what the implications are. What would they have known noon on Friday?
Right, but the BBC was on it. That being said, once they got in the groove, CNN proved what it was, its glory. It went back to its glory days. When I heard Wolf Blitzer on the air on a Saturday morning, I'm thinking, wow, this really is serious. And they kind of redeemed themselves because they've had a tough couple of years with a lot of scandals and controversies and upheavals. And so kudos to CNN for doing a stellar job.
Sky News and BBC also, they were very, very much on the mark too.
And the one medium that used to be really great at breaking news, Twitter, was okay, but not what it used to be, and it was hard to sort truth from fiction.
Do they have any news staff anymore? Any staff at all anymore? Just Elon. Isn't he running the whole thing? Oh, and the new director he appointed, I forgot her name already.
Right. Oh, yeah. Nobody's moderating that anymore. Yeah. It is a junkyard at times. And in this case, there were glimpses of the truth, and you had to rely on whoever was tweeting. And now they don't even have blue check marks, usually as a badge of honor. So Twitter failed, I think, on this one as well.
100%. I mean, you just can't use it the way you did 2 years ago in a situation like this. I think those days are over. You can't fix it.
Yeah, you remember Twitter was the first place that we found anything about the raid on bin Laden's compound in Pakistan.
And around that same time, the Arab Spring happened on Twitter. And
2011.
That probably can't happen on that platform again.
No, I think you're right.
It's still pretty good for finding out why there's traffic backed up in your area if somebody is still going to Twitter. But beyond the region, beyond that, you don't see anything.
Here's a topic, a newspaper topic, and then whether or not print is dead, which we've discussed at length. And can we still call them dailies? Many of the daily newspapers owned by Lee Enterprises, which owns 77 newspapers across the country, are cutting their print schedule to just 3 days a week. And they're also ending traditional delivery. That's not by newspaper boys anymore, but by carriers that drive cars. They're going instead to the U.S. Postal Service. This is all happening in July. It's happening to most of the dailies in the Lee Enterprises fold. Some of the bigger dailies are still sticking with 7-day coverage. But was this inevitable? And seriously, can we still call them dailies?
Well, they're going to want to label themselves as dailies because they're promising that they're going to have online coverage every day. It's hard not to be skeptical about what kind of coverage that's going to be because these are almost always accompanied by a decrease in staff. So you have fewer people producing content than you did before, no matter what.
Right, you do this, you cut print to save money on paper, to save money on press runs, and to save money on content. You don't produce quite as much stuff that way, and they're doing it at a time when they're facing declining revenues. But our position, when I worked at the Daily Gazette, was that reading a print newspaper was a habit, a daily habit. You wanted to encourage it, and you didn't want to break the habit. And I think for a lot of newspaper readers, they would be breaking their habit.
You know, you're all veterans of this world, but I would just say, as somebody who does read a print newspaper, doing a robust 7-day-a-week, 24/7 news website, social media, podcast platform, whatever, that's a lot harder than putting out a daily print product for a set number of pages that has a deadline and gets printed at a certain time. So my worry would be, if you're dropping down to 3 days, are you sacrificing so much of, I mean, they wouldn't be doing it if things were going well, obviously. It's much more difficult to become that online source around the clock than it is to put that paper out. And obviously that's not going to happen in 77 markets.
The truth is that this is all the pattern that we've seen for the last 15 years. It isn't just that they're cutting back editions. It isn't just that they're removing paper. They're going to cut staff. They're going to get cheaper and cheaper and lousier reporters, and the report is going to cover. It is not doing more with less or any of the other empty advertising things. This is the death of newspapers. We're not reading them anymore. And I actually am more upset about the loss of a monthly. National Geographic. We had stacks of them in our. I'm sorry that I gave away a whole bunch of them now. After 130 years, that publication is going away. The thing they did that was so remarkable was pay writers and photographers enough money so they could spend like a year researching a project in a remote place. And that's going to all end. And now they're going to contract out work. They'll hire freelancers who will not put that time and effort in.
What was the line in the Washington Post story about how National Geographic is going to go forward? It stuck out to me, if I can find it here. They are going to use a series of editors and freelancers to kind of patch things together. National Geographic?
I know.
I'm one of those people who thinks National Geographic is great but never buys it.
Right.
So I have no one but myself and everyone else to blame. And yet they had well over 1 million subscribers in the United States and millions others around the world.
But at the height, they had 12 million.
12 million,
That's
yes.
hard to imagine anymore for a print product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. This involves 19 editorial staffers who are losing their jobs. They're going to keep some editors. And they're going to go with freelancers. And the question, they go with freelancers because you don't have to pay them benefits at all. I don't know if they still had a pension or not. Freelancers probably will get paid, could be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. But does it compensate them for the amount of time that the stories would take? And the other thing that the magazine's not going to be sold on newsstands anymore. I think it will be printed and distributed, and there'll be, of course, your digital version. And then there's Nat Geo, which is doing high quality video. But the magazine also curtailed their photo contract, which allowed photographers to go out and wander, the Sahara or wander the world and take those great photos. And so a lot of papers, we've all used freelancers over the time, but it's been to supplement.
But I can understand this switch to freelance writers. That kind of makes sense. But how much time are they going to be able to spend on a story? Maybe sometimes they were in the field longer than they had to be because they could be. Maybe you could do a story in 3 months instead of 5 months.
Well, the magazine is going to fold, I think. I think this is a stopgap measure before it goes away. If people didn't buy it when you had high-class, amazing photography and writing, what are they going to do when it's, discount, low-cost freelancers? It's going away, and that's really sad. But the truth is it is not the fault of the owners, I think, the managers who are making business decisions. It's us, the readers. We're not. Will we buy books on these topics?
If you ever need any National Geographics, just go to a yard sale, and you usually can find boxes of them.
You can,
Yeah, they're going to triple in price now.
The old ones, right. It's the 2023 editions that are worthless.
It's why I wanted to go to Africa. I grew up with, a neighbor had National Geographics in a bookshelf, and I would look at the pictures, mostly the pictures, which of course for a little kid are famously shocking, yes, erotic. But I loved it, and I always wanted to go there because of that. And I'm sad that that's lost, but I feel like a dinosaur even as I'm saying it.
I think I wanted to go to Hugh Hefner's house for the same reason.
Oh no.
This isn't to say that some really good work is done by freelancers. Some of the best journalists in the world are freelancers, but it's a tough life, and it is a tough way to make a living. It really encourages better work instead of being a freelancer if you have a full-time gig someplace.
One thing I've learned just working with freelancers on a different scale, though, they're great. You can't count on them. You can't build a news organization on freelancers. I always look at freelance work for WAMC as extra.
Yep.
We've got our staff, and that's our daily heartbeat. And if we can get a great freelance story from a part of our listening area that we're not in all the time, great. It's helpful. It's not how you go forward into a new budget year planning for your news coverage.
Right.
Right, and there's all sorts of legal issues too about libel and slander, and who has reprint rights on a freelance piece, whether or not it's perpetually owned. Do you put them under contract for one piece? It can be a management nightmare. The other thing is you're editing from afar when you do this. You're editing over the phone. I mean, this happens a lot in newsrooms anyway, but when you're dealing with freelancers, it's more and more so. You're not getting the discussion about, well, why don't you take this story in this direction, or why don't we do that story? So National Geographic, as are many magazines, are going to be missing this.
And when you're vetting freelancers, not that much different than when you're vetting your own staff, but when you're vetting freelancers, you're depending on them to know what the heck they're doing and know what they're writing about. And the editors are often not going to be well versed in the topics that they're editing, so they might be okay as editing for the story content and the word usage and that, but do they know enough to question what they are reading?
Not a single one of my RPI students in my last class had a subscription to a magazine or had read one in the last month.
Moving on, so let's talk about college newspapers. There are hundreds of them across the country. There's even high school newspapers, but particularly the Penn State's Daily Collegian. It's 136 years old, and it's facing this financial disaster ahead because they're going to lose all their university funding by the 24-25 academic year. The university's Board of Trustees will vote on this funding slash in July. The Daily Collegian is independent, it says, from the university, but it does get more than half of its budget.
Not independent.
We're not independent. They get from $475,000 to $200,000 a year from the college to help them run the paper. The university is proposing no funding for the student-run newspapers in 24-25. First of all, the issue of the funding, and then second of all, what is the value of college newspapers for the industry going forward?
Oh, I have some thoughts on this. I am a big believer in it. I think it's where you learn, you make all of your mistakes. You learn from your mistakes, you try things out, you figure out how to actually do this work. I think they're really important. They're underutilized at the University at Albany, where some of us teach. The student paper has been a resource that is not used by enough undergraduate students who say they want to go into the field. It's there for your limited amount of time that you're a college student. There are only so many issues, and every one that goes by without your byline in it is a missed opportunity, in my opinion. Now, as to the funding, having worked at the student paper that did not get any money from the school when it ran out of money, this is a very tough issue that papers, not just at Penn State, are dealing with. What does it mean to stay open? The paper that I came up on is not in print anymore, although it is online. But we took it as a real badge of honor that we didn't have any funding from the school because we didn't have to ever pull punches. And that was for better and for worse.
I've had a different experience. I was at Syracuse in the 70s and did not join this. I did join the student paper and quit because it was during the Vietnam protests.
This is the Daily Orange?
The Daily Orange, another, fabled student newspaper. But if you wrote a story that was journalistic piece, that we were learning about in journalism class, it would be totally rewritten into a leftist screed, and so I quit. And then at the Albany, UAlbany, the paper there is execrable, and the independence that you all value so much, you don't even want like copy editors, like free teachers willing to read your copy for spelling errors, and it was horrible and not useful for clips and not a good experience. And the business now is such that prospective journalism students should be working for community newspapers, working under real editors who will hold them to account and raise their standards.
I would agree with you if some of the community newspapers were actually equipped to train. The Gazette is an example of a paper where it would be a good place for students to be working. In the Times Union.
The Times Union, so Spotlight.
I don't know that the Times Union is even taking interns these days. I know the Gazette
legal
definitely.
issues.
The Gazette has been, and it's been wonderful for some of my students from UAlbany.
There are legal issues and money issues. They don't want to pay interns, but slavery is sort of illegal. So how do you get interns?
Yeah, my old newspaper, when they don't have a location for people to have camaraderie, everybody is working remotely. I don't think it's the learning experience. That said, I think that. UAlbany, the difference between the UAlbany paper, where there's a small cadre, very small cadre of students who are interested in doing this, as opposed to a place like Syracuse or Penn State, where the culture is totally different, as is the budget. 120 students involved in the school paper in Penn State.
Well, I hate to cut you off, but that's all the time we have.
Oh, no, the show should be an hour.
Yes, indeed.
We're cutting back our print run.
Our yak run.
Thanks to Rosemary, Barbara, and Ian. Thanks also to our producer this week, Jody Cowan. I'm Judy Patrick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on The Media Project.
The Media Project is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. This week's projectors include former editor of the Daily Gazette and vice president for editorial development for the New York State Press Association, Judy Patrick; Rosemary Armao, investigative journalist and RPI and UAlbany professor; Barbara Lombardo, former editor of the Saratogian and Adjunct Professor at the University at Albany; and WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. You can listen to the Media Project anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm your producer, Jody Cowan. Thanks for listening.
Interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.